Electronically. I hopefully got it sent to you guys electronically, but if not, I'll make sure to send it to the clerk so she can distribute it to all of you. We only did a very small printing just for key officials, not for the public. We're trying to do as much online as we can to save money. In terms of other policies, we did finally implement a department-wide policy on Narcan distribution so that we're a Project Hope site, and also staff are being trained and able to carry as well in our building, and trying to train other partners. We had a really great Pride Parade participation. Miss Alaska joined us. She's going to be promoting public health as part of her platform, and we really appreciated having her there. As far as the cemetery goes, they had their busiest June ever. They conducted 46 burial services and wall interments. They're really, really busy in the summer. For any of those of you who have any interest in our cemetery, they do a lot of events. And they just finished one up actually last week where they kind of do historical recreations of well-known Alaskans. Admin, we're happy to be fully staffed in our admin team right now. And continuing to work on enhancements for SharePoint. We are waiting on grant awards to come through. We recently got notice of our ADRC grant approved, and we did get full funding for our community health nursing. So we just got communication yesterday that we got a full $3.2 million. So they did not take any cuts. They absorbed all the cuts internally at the state, which is greatly appreciated, so that we can continue to operate at full function at the community level. As all of you know, the Human Services Community Matching Grant from the state was vetoed. So in this memo, in this document I'll send to you, it kind of shows who of all the grantees actually received any of the matching funds that the municipality puts in. That was Covenant House got fully funded. The Alzheimer's Resource and Disability Services got their full funding, and Awake got a partial funding. And that is based on our procurement rules around how the procurement was done. So all of the people who had the highest scores got fully funding based on their scoring. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Animal control, we obviously have a presentation and participation here for you guys to ask any questions you have about the proposed changes. Emergency preparedness, we've been very busy. As many of you know, we did activate our department operations center, and the municipal employee emergency operations center activated around the July 2nd fire. It actually was very close to our mass care supplies for people and pets, and so it was it was a good learning experience and gave us some opportunity to think about how we might want to deploy where our mass sheltering supplies are actually kept. So there's been great after action. The new director of the Emergency Operations Center was very active and engaged, and so it was good. It was a good exercise. We did stay open and active for about a week because of smoke and heat, and we are all developing some coordinated plans around smoke and heat. These are not problems we've had in the past. We've had smoke, but never heat issues the way we anticipate probably having them going into the future, so we'll be working on that with the EOC. The air quality was an ongoing issue, as all of you know. The child care licensing, we're just awaiting on funding. Community safety and development, that's our HUD program, for those of you who might not remember. So we have the 2019 action plan is out to you guys in the next assembly meeting for approval. Our team is currently developing recommendations for substantial amendments to reprogram unspent funds from previous years, and the TBD items that are in the plan that you guys are looking to approve next week. Once we are able to get that plan completed, then we can move forward with the recommended amendments, which take about 120 days to activate, because they have to go to public comment, then they come to you, and then they go to HUD, and then they get approved. So hopefully we'll be able to use some of those resources to support some of our partners who are probably in great need right now. The 2020 action plan process will begin upon adoption of the 2019 plan. We anticipate having that 2020 plan to you by December. Then we'll be caught up on our planning. So you'll have the plans in the same active year that we anticipate receiving funds. We have an RFP out for about $700,000 in capital projects from the Housing Trust Funds. Let's see. I just shared this with Meg, but actually I'll share it with all of you. We were on track to have our emergency temporary cold weather shelter policies and procedures updated by October. We may expedite that based on your guys' ordinance work that you're doing right now. We're still working on recruiting a manager for that area. Senior and emergency outreach is where our ADRC is. We have seen a twofold increase in calls from seniors since July 1st when senior benefits were cut. They're very distressed calls. I'm sure you guys have heard this from constituents. People use that money to make their rent, to pay for food, for prescriptions, and they're struggling and in great need right now. So our team is working on being as responsive as they can to that. The Anchorage Safety Patrol contract was amended to add a second van for the summer. So historically that contract has always had 2 vans in the winter and then they take them off in the summer. But we had an incredible increase in call stacking. And so we were able to quickly put an amendment in and get a second van on for the remainder of the summer, which hopefully will decrease pressure on the fire department. And public health has been very, very busy, lots of activity. They saw 1,250 people at the Pride Fest. And I'll have lots of data in here you can look at on your own time about how many people we served and what we served them with. WIC went to EWIC. I think they shared that with you last time. The lactation tent made its debut at Pride Fest, and it was very popular, and we've gotten lots of requests for having that available at community events, and so that was kind of a nice positive feedback for our staff. And environmental health services, we talked a little bit about that. There were 70 food inspections in the first week of July because of all of the different events, so that team is very, very, very busy. And I believe that is it on that. So budget impacts, I just wanted to share with you that because the ADVSIP funds were not put into any budget, that $300,000 about a year money is cut. That means that about $190,000 that we gave to Awake Star and Victims for Justice won't be going to them. About 100 survivors every year that were served that were from rural Alaska will not be served. And about $10,000 in professional fees for expert witnesses will not be available. We still have the municipal money, and we will continue to serve in the municipal area in a limited way, but we'll continue that program. But those are real cuts to providers in Anchorage that have a broader impact on the state. I shared with you that who got funding from the Human Services Community Matching Grants, but Awake did experience a $118,000 cut. Rural Cap got 2 cuts, one to Sick a Place for $150,000, Safe Harbor for $102,000. Catholic Social Services also received about $300,000, $150,000 for Brother Francis and $150,000 for Clare House. Those are real cuts. Beans Cafe received about $127,000 for meals and referrals and social service programs. So overall, you guys have heard this. I'm sure you've spent many meetings learning about these kinds of impacts. We did communicate early and quickly to all the providers so that they would know what they were going to get or not get so that they could make decisions. In addition, the domestic violence services in Anchorage received an additional $335,000 in cuts from losses from the HAP grant and AHFC matching grants and rapid rehousing. I got a report from CDVSA that lists out all the additional cuts. So in total, between Awake and STAR, they experienced $545,000 in cuts. That's going to have dramatic impacts on the services that they provide, so I'll make sure you get that. They provided us a report with the full cuts to every domestic violence provider in the state, and I just cut out the 2 that were here so that you guys had at least the numbers in front of you, and that is my report.
Okay, I've got one question, and then Mr. Constant is in the queue. So first of all, I'd really like to see the impacts, the cuts on the domestic violence and sexual assault survivors sort of services in some form that's relatively easy to share, like a one-pager. If you guys could provide something like that.
Yeah.
Something in image file that's easy to share, or a PDF that's easy to share. The question I have is just asking you to repeat. You said there was a certain kind of call from seniors that doubled.
Oh, right.
What was the exact What kind of calls were those, to what
They were
line?
we have had a twofold call, like an increase in calls.
So 100% increase in calls.
Right, particularly from seniors. And almost all of those increased calls are related to their loss in benefits.
And so we being the health department,
Yeah,
which number specifically?
So the health department houses the Aging and Disability Resource Center. We are a grantee of the state that operates this resource location. They do a variety of different things. And oftentimes seniors call when they're looking to get resource or referrals or connected to services.
Is it a hotline or is it just like their main line?
It's just our main number.
So the health department's Aging and Disability Resource Center has experienced a 100% increase in call volume due to the cut in the senior benefit. Is that an actual statement?
I can send you an actual, if you want something from the ADRC that's exact.
That's good. I could say approximately 100%. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. On a topic not covered in your report, but on the horizon, I had some folks reach out to me from the farm in Mountain View who are running their small entrepreneurial businesses and food carts, for lack of a better term, but they're really tense. And their advocates had asked if there was a way we could look at the permitting process to streamline it for them and come up with a method to save them some cost and burden, because as small micro entrepreneurs, some of the challenges are pretty high for them. And so what I offered back to them is that I would have asked them to provide for me as concise a position that they have on the issue, and that we would have a conversation about ways to make that possible. I broached to them possibly the idea of one of their advocacy groups doing a general permit, that we come up with a method for them to ensure that their subs are in compliance. But I don't have a specific method because it's your project, and so
it probably is going to. We were aware of the situation, and we looked through the code, looked for solutions, and at this time there's nothing in the code that allows us to waive fees or do those things. So it will require code revisions, and probably it will take some time, but it's certainly on our list of things to address. Shannon Cooten brought it forward, and the vendors themselves. And so we did provide them with kind of a complete answer of why we can't. We couldn't do what they wanted in that particular situation, but that does not mean that we can't revisit how the code is designed.
And personally, my perspective is we don't sacrifice health and safety, but at the same time, maybe come up with a way that it could be streamlined for a certain tier of vendors in the community. So
we're open to re-looking at that.
Thank you.
Another quick follow-up on this back to the senior benefit. So when you say that 100% increase in call volume, are we talking thousands of calls, hundreds of calls, dozens of calls?
It's probably under 100. I can get the actual number. So I'll ask Maureen to provide me, since July 1st, how many and how much is that increased over, in a regular month, you get 150 calls.
Yeah.
And was it just the first few days and people were shocked and surprised?
Sure.
Or have we maintained it since then? I didn't check in with her this week.
And you said that people use the senior benefit for rent primarily, or also food,
I listen
medicine?
to the voicemails. They leave really long voicemails.
Sure.
I'm sure they leave you guys messages too. And it's they didn't know it was going to happen. They take care of their, one woman was talking about how she babysits her grandchildren so that her son can go to work, and all of her money from disability goes to her rent, and she has that money for food, and she's already going to the food bank once a month, and she didn't even, hadn't anticipated it, and her daughter's coming today and she didn't have any food because she didn't have any money to buy any food. And so it's just helping people revisit how they're going to access, whether it's nutrition in that case, and in others it's the extra amount of money they needed for pharmacy. It's such a little bit amount of money, but for people who live on the edge of, it's significant landslide type of stuff that can really destabilize their ability to stay housed or support their children who are working, whatever it might be. So we can provide you with more anecdotal information if you want, but I'll give you more exact numbers about the calls.
Thank you. No, that's great. Any other questions on the health update before we go to the animal control?
Yeah, thanks. First, ask for a one-pager, some kind of a easily shareable piece for the Awake, I think it was.
The impacts on domestic violence and sexual assault survivor
Right.
organizations.
So, but what I think then might be also valuable is for all of the areas that you serve, maybe for each of the general functional areas, we could have a similar document that we can also share, if it's senior services or Awake or homeless.
We didn't take cuts ourselves.
Right.
We took cuts to pass through.
I understand.
And so it's hard, like we've been asked by City Hall as well, like there's a lot of interest in us being able to quantify what we think the impacts are downstream, which is difficult for us to predict at this time.
Right.
We do anecdotally believe that there's going to be significant impacts, but it's very difficult to identify concrete numbers of how many more people. I mean, we'll see it if there's going to be an uptick in people coming in for WIC. Is there going to be? We'll see it later on. Unfortunately, it's hard for me to commit to being able to give you something comprehensive. I can about what we believe the impacts of the cuts to the Human Services Community Matching Grants, what we got around the domestic violence and sexual assault. Those ones are really concrete.
Great.
We know what those are.
Whatever they are.
I can do that. And as I'm able to get real factual, I'm also very comfortable saying I believe it's going to have this downstream impact if there's evidence in other places that those are the impacts. We're just very short benched.
I think it's one of these things where a lot of us have platforms to get this information out to the public. I think we're willing to get it out to the public in a way that, my experience is some of these organizations have been a little bit quiet because they're worried, I think, about destabilizing their relationships. And so they're getting their budget cut, but they're not being super vocal, what I've seen about it. Part of that, I think, is some optimism about, well, maybe we'll get this funding restored.
Well, people haven't got their grant agreements yet.
Right. And so...
so it's a true fear. Like, do you say something now, or do you wait until you get your grant agreement so you do know how much behavioral health funding you have?
Right.
Because you don't really know. I mean, there is a sense of fear that there could be punitive.
The health department and the Anchorage Assembly don't suffer from those same concerns, right? And so I think we can tell that story without risking what's going to happen.
And I have our commission did a letter, I think, against the vetoes or their position about it, and I have some communication that I've sent to the legislative leadership about how we see these impacting the community, and I'm happy to share that information and this information in a way that you can share it. And as I have more, what I feel like are closer to facts, I'll share them with you.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's all on that topic.
And measles. Measles.
Oh, yeah.
Just, I'm sure you've already seen it, but it's like, whatever, this month is awesome. We just go smoke, fire, heat, and measles in Kenai.
Oh, Kenai, sorry.
It's in Kenai. So we're working closely with our state partners on communication, making sure people know how to get vaccinated if they want to. And it's very rare that there's just one case. So that person was in spaces that they exposed others, and so we'll just have to all wait and see how that pans out. The state still feels like the city of Anchorage has a very great immunization rate with MMR, and don't anticipate a far-reaching outbreak. But we'll see. That's all.
Yeah, God willing. All right, so we'll move on to item B, AO 2019-91, ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code Title 17, Animals. Let's see. Chair of the Assembly at the request of the mayor. So this is you guys too, right? You all have a presentation on this? Yes. Okay. Please take it away.
Okay, if you would, everybody should have the AO 2019-91 in front of you. And what I figured we would do is I would just go section by section, and you can stop me at any point if you have questions or need clarification. But of course, Title 17 is here to promote the public health and safety and encourage responsible pet ownership. I would just like to acknowledge the people we've been working with. In addition with the Assembly, we appreciate your assistance in this. The Anchorage Health Department works with the Animal Care Control Contractor as well as our community partners and the Anchorage Police Department when it comes to the cruelty law enforcement. But I'd like to, last but certainly not least, our Animal Control Advisory Board. We have Chair Allegra Hammer here and our Vice Chair, Missy Milanis, here today in case you have any questions. They put a lot of time and effort into making these changes. How we got here, we noticed there were some deficiencies in the code when it comes to addressing enforcement in certain cases. or there was questions that came up as far as classification of animals, and we also want to align the code, make sure we're consistent with the state code. So working with the animal control contractor as well as the advisory board and the proposal, we did hold 2 public comment hearings, and we made some modifications based on the public input. So starting off with section 1, Section 1. Starting off, we had to make some changes to the definitions. Primarily, because we were adding an animal rescue and an animal rescue shelter, we had a license. We had to identify what those meant. And the primary differences is one is a brick and mortar facility, if you will, that houses animals, and the other one is a network of foster homes. But the license will apply to both. Along the definitions, we are defining what a fine means, because some places in the code it just says civil penalty or civil fine, and this just clarifies that it all means the same thing. And we included a definition for a primary enclosure, because we do use that definition later under the standard section, where that is a structure that is used to restrict an animal, and that can be a room, a pen, a cage, a kennel, a compartment, a hutch. So we covered all aspects. And then we added a definition of shelter. And this is something that a lot of agencies like Straw for Dogs and other agencies have been asking us for. So we spent a lot of time. Without boring you with all the details, we couldn't come up with exact numbers that would fit every species. So it has to be suitable for that species, that age, that breed. But a lot of emphasis went into the dog shelter, and that's primarily where we get our complaints, is on dog shelter. So we define what a dog shelter will be. It has to, have to be off the ground, weatherproof, sufficient ventilation, small enough to warm the interior, but also large enough for the animal to turn around. And then we felt compelled to add examples of what is inadequate dog shelters. Underneath decks, metal barrels that stay cold, cardboard boxes, and then if just draw your attention to line 16, which is 2G, long-term confinement in an enclosed shelter not specifically designed for that purpose. So this covers, for example, a vehicle parked on a public street. So anything over 30 days, that's more than enough time to find adequate shelter. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that right there, 30 days, to a lay person seems a lot of time. I know that we went on for months and months with the one incident that we had, maybe over the year or two. So 30 days is much less than months and months or years and years, but 30 days still seems to be a lot of time to have an animal unsafely sheltered. And so what's the thinking around that?
Well, if I could, this doesn't preclude that shelter from being adequate for the animal. You can still, they went out there and inspected that vehicle, and it was adequate.
Right.
Was it ideal, but it was adequate.
Black covering around all the windows and all that.
Correct.
I get that met the legal standard, but maybe not the ethical standard. And so the 30 days is the question. What's the rationale there?
Well, the rationale on the discussion was, we were trying to say, well, okay, people take their dogs to work, but that's usually just for a day. So what are the situations where people might be long-term vacationing, or somebody suddenly finds himself homeless? So is it long? Yes, but we were trying to come up with a standard we felt would be give somebody sufficient time to find, to remedy the situation. And yes, 30 days is long, but it seemed fair.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up to that? So that was in my district in Muldoon. Worked on it a bit. Haven't heard about it for about a year. I think one of the dogs was destroyed, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
What happened to the remainder of the animals?
Because she was charged with cruelty, they're currently impounded down at animal control, and she does visit her dogs.
Okay. They're impounded. Does that mean that they will be destroyed if they're not adopted?
Well, it depends on the outcome. It depends on the outcome of the case. Now, if she is found guilty of cruelty and therefore she has to, she forfeits her animals, they will be assessed for adoptability.
Okay.
And if they're not adoptable, then they will be humanely euthanized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr.
Still
Gates.
related to the long-term confinement and the 30 days question, Mr. Costa. I wondered if the intent there was that it's in circumstances where animals not checking on regularly, so untended, not well known, or someone's taking the dog out on a daily or periodic basis. Is the intent that it's 30 days continuously confined in a shelter without being checked in on unattended?
Well, anybody can request a welfare check. And like I said, if the dog is not being adequately cared for, they can be cited right then and there, regardless of whether it's a shelter that is intended for that purpose. I mean, it has to be adequate. It has to be a humane shelter. But this is saying, hey, you can't just set up something temporary that wasn't really designed for that. But specifically on public, we don't say public here, but that's what we were concerned with. So you don't get to treat the animal inhumanely just because you have it as a temporary shelter.
If I could add on to that, so all the other requirements still apply. I think this is just kind of once you get to those 30 days, now we definitely have you. But before those 30 days, all these other requirements of humane care still apply.
Yeah, could I ask one question here? So looking at the definition of shelter, a sound and weatherproof structure with a solid raised above the ground. So I grew up, when I was younger, I lived in Eagle, and we had 3 dog teams on my block, and there still are some dog teams in my district, I know. And it seems like a dog house wouldn't fit this. They're not soundproof, right? And, you know, sometimes they're chained. They're in the doghouse, but they're chained and come out to the yard and back to the doghouse. Would that meet this?
I don't think this means soundproof. I think it means sound, like structurally sound.
Oh, okay. I was thinking like soundproof, weatherproof. Okay, sound, weatherproof structure. That makes more sense. So a dog that is chained to a spike that goes into a dog house, that does fit this criteria.
Yeah, so you'll see it says access somewhere in here.
Okay. Thank you. I misread
the
that.
first part, yeah. Structure that is accessible. So as long as the chain and the stake is close enough to the doghouse to make it accessible to the animal.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Alberto.
Thank you. Actually, Dean's question raised, I'm back on the long-term confinement. It says over 30 days. I can see there being an enforceability issue with this with regard to, does it need to be continuous? What if you make breaks in that? Like, I guess maybe we should discuss or look for a little bit more refinement, because it seems like we might be headed into some areas of dispute that we can maybe head off with a little bit more refinement. So it's just a concern. I don't have the magic language right here, but it's something I'll think about, but I'll also toss out to think about when we're talking about over 30 days. What does that mean? Does that mean continuously? Does that mean other things? What I'm really hearing is that it's long-term confinement in an enclosed shelter not designed for that purpose. To me, that sounds like continuous confinement. So if I am homeless and I have a car and I'm keeping my dog primarily in the car, but I walk it twice a day and do these things with it, and we go on to day 31, am I now in violation of subsection G or not?
It's also specific to the incident we had. I believe she had an apartment for a part of that time, so she could have taken the dogs in the apartment for a day or two.
Her sister had an apartment.
Well, regardless,
Right.
she could have brought the dogs in for a day, broken the 30 days, and then gone back into the car.
So I think we should think about that.
Well, I will say this. We were prepared in this particular case to issue a notice to vacate that property. We were working with legal on it, and I think that still applies, but I guess this is to give us a little more teeth. But I agree with you. I mean, there could be loopholes in here. If we break for one day,
You could write it to say it's like over 14 days continuously, or 30 days, or like 40 days in a 60-day period, or something like that. It would be hard to actually monitor to prove that they were there or not there, but that would probably address her concerns.
Yes, something, because this seems like you're going to end up with a he said, she said situation really quick. Oh, I take my dog out to walk twice a day, or, and I have to get midnight so no one sees it, so I'm really not housing long-term over 30 days. The strictest construction of that would be continuously, like you don't let that dog out. And I don't think that's the intent. So
it's not.
and I'll think about it some more too.
All right. You want to continue with the presentation?
That's section 2 under control and confinement. We were saying that a dog left outdoors, we're going to prohibit being restrained by a choke type, pinch type collar, a rope, anything that basically you could hang an animal with. Because if somebody's not there to monitor the animal or keep a constant eye on him, you know, that it is a hazard to the animal. But it's fine. This doesn't prohibit you from training or walking your animal with those type of collars. Okay, section 3, under care and sanitation. What we're doing here is we are adding a more hardy definition, if you will. We're removing inclement weather because humane care is already defined in the code, and it includes heating and ventilation, sanitary shelter from wind, temperatures, precipitation, sun conditions, all consistent with the animal's normal requirements. So we just felt this was a lot more hardy, so we're swapping those two out. So any questions on that? Okay, section 4, standards for operating facilities. As we said, we're adding in an animal rescue, an animal rescue shelter, as these will be Bruce special purpose license. So along with that, we have to update some of the standards, and we made some adjustments to all special purpose license, which includes that animals, again, have to have adequate floor spacing, be able to stand up, turn freely. The primary enclosure, which we defined in the earlier part, it has to be cleaned daily so the animals avoid any contact with their excrement. Somebody did feel that it was necessary that under veterinary care that we phrase it so people understand, hey, you don't wait to get a care so that it suffers. It has to be timely veterinary care. And as far as the care and feeding, again, using the definition of humane, just provide for the humane care and feeding of animals since it's already defined. And number 6, provide lighting, whether natural or artificial. We actually did run into a situation where a place was so dark that the inspectors, there wasn't lighting in there, you could even really inspect the facility. So you're adding that into the code. Then on the next page, owner, operator, animal rescue shelter shall maintain. These are unique just to those. We're saying that once you've taken an animal in, you have to maintain the medical records for that animal and pass those records on to the owner that you fostered, that adopts the animal. And you must provide a current listing of those foster homes with that network and make it available upon request. And the question did come up to who, and so we should put in there, you know, that is to the animal care and control facility, the contractor.
Yep,
Yes.
Mr. Constable.
Thank you. Immediately raised the question of who and who has legal access to that information, because although it's not human protected health information, for sure that information might want to be less than absolutely discoverable by the public. Is there some protection on that information?
Yes, that's why we put in there that it would be confidential. And I checked with we checked with legal on air, and I guess AMC 3.09.040 applies, where so essentially it would be just kept confidential to the contractor and to the health department. But if somebody was to do a freedom of information request, we would not release the names of these individuals in that network. It is. Well, it's noted here.
I just didn't know what that standard was.
And then on number 3, this is already code, and this will come up, but we're just readdressing the fact that even if you're a foster home, if you exceed 3 or more animals, you require a multi-animal license, and that is currently code. But we don't want somebody to miss that section if they were in here just reading about foster homes. Section 5, and this applies to sections 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, 18, 19, 20. We are removing all the obsolete references to wolf hybrids. State code outlawed wolf hybrids back in January 23rd of 2002. And we have no wolf hybrids licensed within the municipality of Anchorage. So the only section of code that will remain is the section that says that possession of wolf hybrids is prohibited. But you can't keep them, you can't sell them, you can't advertise them, you can't possess them. So that just clears up the code a bit. Section 6, off-leash dog parks, and this was something Quinn Davison had actually made the suggestion. It was a great suggestion. Since we tend to add more dog parks, and we may even at some point, maybe move a dog park. We're just going to reference the municipal website instead of having to update the code every time we add a dog park. That's where. Okay, section 10, this is where we remove the reference to rescue groups that were approved and registered with the animal control. And the reason for that is we really don't have, beyond the licensing, a registrar. And this was confusing to people that were getting special purpose licenses. They were, oh, am I registered and I don't require this? And the answer is no. This was more for, like we have some people, if we have a litter of kittens that require constant care around the clock, and animal control can't provide that, we might have somebody that fosters that litter. Well, we don't require them to have a litter license because they're acting on behalf of the center.
Wait, you just said something. Is there such a thing as a litter license? For like normal folks have to get a license when
There
they're...
is if you plan on selling or reconveying more than 3 litters in a year. It's kind of like used cars. You can have a litter and sell, but you can't make it a business. Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're not licensing cats.
That'll be the next
next year.
Okay. Under commercial facility license, we added, and this was for the public comment, we added for any period of time for somebody that boards or grooms dogs, because some people felt that boarding somehow implied overnight, and it doesn't. You know, if you're collecting a fee for it, then you need a license. And then, of course, we added in the animal rescue license, and it will be valid for 1 year. And we added that a veterinary clinic is not considered a rescue organization for purpose of this section. In section 11, this is where we actually spell out the procedures for applying for the animal rescue license. And this is where we added a requirement to provide that listing of the foster homes. And the listing shall include, what shall it include? Name, address, phone, and either a phone number or an email. And in the listing, again, we state will be kept confidential. And then we added on there where it says, upon request, applicants must provide current rabies vaccinations proof for any animals over 4. Now, we do require that of anybody that asks for a multi-animal license, a muster's license, where it's your own animals. But in cases of where you have an animal facility where you're constantly turning over, a doggy daycare, they will go in and, upon the inspection, they will go in and say, where do you keep all your licenses? Instead of asking you to give them 100 licenses, say, where's the license for this animal? Where's the license for that dog? And they'll spot check for the application. Section 13, this is for impoundment at a business or an owner's home for a level 5 animal. A level 5 animal is an animal that will be euthanized. But if the person has requested a hearing or is elected to take a report, we have to hold and impound that animal. Well, there are times where it is actually more appropriate to allow the homeowner to maintain that animal at their home, particularly if it's an animal with medical condition or senior in age. But we're telling them if you do, you have to meet all the requirements of a classification of a level 3 or 4, meaning 6-sided enclosure, muzzle when you walk it, keep the public safe. Okay, section 14, protective custody. This was fully vetted by legal, and this is the state statute. Recently, about a year ago, started requiring a bond for anybody whose animal is in protective custody. And we've had animals for cruelty cases that have been here for as long as a year. And then in the final analysis, the person loses and says, well, I'm forfeiting my animal, and then the fees for the medical fees and the boarding fees all winds up going to collection and goes uncollected. So in this case, we're saying, well, you must put forth a bond care for that animal for the first 30 days and every 30 days subsequent after that. And this basically defines the time frame that we have to notify you within 2 business days, and you have 10 days in which to pay it. And then whenever a second bond is required, we'll give you a 10-day notice, and again, you have 10 days in which to pay it. But at any time you become delinquent, we could let you know that you are required to forfeit that animal at that time. And of course, you have a due process if you want a hearing. Yes.
Yeah, Mr.
What's the scale of those fees?
$14 a day for boarding.
$420 a month.
Per dog, yes.
Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. What's the kind of timeline for one of these cases to go through? Because redoing it every 30 days seems kind of onerous if we know it's a longer timeline.
Well, they're not all. I mean, you can have them as short as 90 days.
That's on the low end, 90 days?
And I'll tell you what I really anticipate. I anticipate that these people that just drag this out, that the first time I ask for a bond, you're going to forfeit your animal.
Nonetheless,
But
I'm
I'm
just
saying
thinking
that's
about the operation of the ordinance that, I mean, for both administration purposes and owners' purposes, if
Right.
we know that one of these hearings would be not less than take not less than 90 days to process through,
Right.
why would we put this on an every 30-day timeline versus just kind of taking care of it up front with, then the extenuating circumstances requiring the renewal?
And we talked about that, and we also kind of said, well, for some people, you get paid monthly, so you may not be able to afford a long-term bond. You can only afford to pay out monthly.
So, well, but at $412 or whatever Mr. Dunbar's math was for the 30
Well, and any medical treatment should be required.
I mean, that could become cost prohibitive for someone in the first month, which then leads to forfeit. I mean, are there payment plans for those folks?
There's no payment plans.
So, yeah, I was going to comment. So I guess it's worth pointing out this is only for folks that lost their animal due to cruelty charges.
Correct.
Right. That softens it a little bit for me, although I still see what Ms. Zolotel was saying. Mr. Constant?
Are you sure it's only when they are taken for the purposes of being animal cruelty? Are we sure of that?
Well, protective custody.
Right.
And
so
it
there's
says,
a number of
and subject to Chapter 8.55, which is cruelty.
protective custody is subject to that, but not only that. And so my question is there any circumstance one could imagine that the department would want a waiver?
I'm sorry.
Is there any circumstances under which the department could imagine they would want a waiver of this? I understand that there's a desire not to have flexibility in the code under certain areas, but I often want to see the departments be able to make a case-by-case determination, not necessarily shall, but at the determination of X shall, right?
It's basically saying, like, would we want to put in here, just at the discretion of the director, to waive that under any case circumstances? Can you guys think of any circumstances where animals have been brought into protective custody?
I can't, because the other times we have protective custody might be somebody gets pulled over for a DUI, and so and the code says they got 10 days in which to come redeem their animal. So in a cruelty case, you can't redeem your animal. It is being held as evidence. But if it's a case of it's protective custody because, DWI, once you're out or once a family member can make it down to the shelter, they can redeem your animal at that time.
And they're not going to be charged in those cases.
They'll be charged $14
Per day, no matter what.
Yes.
And they won't be able to redeem their dog unless they can pay.
But those cases don't have a bond.
No, that would be a
The
bond.
bond is only for the
That's
cruelty
code.
charge,
That's
yeah,
code
the
now.
855 charge.
Yeah, that would be the
Yeah.
code as it stands now, even irrespective of this change.
So it's in subsection C, the word "and" there is very important. They're in protective custody and subject to Chapter 8.55 charges,
Yes.
which are cruelty charges. So the section doesn't apply unless there's cruelty charges. Yeah.
And that is the intent.
Any other, Ms. Zolotel?
If when we're talking on these per day charges, is there anything that gives discretion to waive the fees? I could see where animal control grabbed a dog because they got a complaint. They have, I guess, protective custody of the animal because the person's like in the hospital for an extended period and can't get in communication, or something like that, where it would be kind of compassionate grounds to not charge them $14 a day.
Do
You have discretion or not?
We do not. I mean, to say we don't. I mean, I can always go to the chief animal control officer and say, hey, we have a unique extenuating circumstance. we've actually had cases where people have gone to nonprofits and had somebody pay their fees for them because APD had picked up a loose animal, brought it down there, and the person says, I can't. Well, and that's even beyond the $14 a day. That's the claim fee, which gosh, I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So that's a little.
It depends on it.
So yeah, it's a little higher. And then in some cases the animal wasn't licensed, so they have to license the animal. They have to bring it up to code. So no, there's really no discretion that I'm aware of.
That's the question, though. Do you want discretion? That's the question.
Yes. No. I can only think of that one incident where they wound up going to a nonprofit where the question really got raised in the 2 years that I've been doing this.
And so, but even that one time could have been mitigated by having a tool. And even if you don't use it, isn't it better to have a tool than not have a tool? I don't know. I just tend to believe that flexibility is not a bad
Yeah, I
thing.
mean, it's still used for the cost of care. So it's going to be that we're using our discretion to use taxpayer dollars to pay
Right.
for this individual's fees that they've,
So the answer
incurred.
is no.
I would think not.
I think it would be really, really exercised if there was any reason
I mean,
for it. I just don't.
And I think some discussion has come on that in the past is if, the fees for a day or two are so minimal, how are you caring for the animal once you've taken the animal home if you can't afford, a minimal fee?
Well, from my perspective, I don't spend $14 a day on housing my dog.
Right, that's
And,
probably true.
I spend $60 a month on dog food for my 2 dogs plus a quarterly vet visit.
Mortgage and
Yeah, but that is a
facilities.
sunk cost that's there or not. Otherwise, if the pets weren't there, I'd still be paying that. So $14 a day can be substantive to some people, but to me, even that's much more than I spend on a daily basis.
It looks like they may be able to request a hearing on the matter, and we could look into that and see what that process would look like if there was a
But the
circumstance.
hearing officer is going to say the code doesn't provide a waiver in any way. That's what the hearing officer's job is going to be, is to say, wait a minute, the code is clear. And so, I guess I'm down a
I
rabbit
think
hole.
we'd have to really define, if that was ever something that we did, you'd have to have incredibly specific, detailed criteria by which we would waive such a fee so that it would be fair to all parties. Because while it may not be substantive to you and it is to this person, is that the reason we're waiving it? I mean, there'd have to be very clear decision-making
I think
protocols.
that's a policy decision, really, and not necessarily ours. That's administrative, what the level of criteria
I
might
think
be.
to the public it becomes it's just like the permits for food. It just becomes very, very, when I look at it, I have the same perspective, right? So when it presents in front of me, I'm like, oh yeah. And then when you think about how it's applied to the whole population, well, this suddenly is very complex. And the decision-making would have to be really criteria-based and require
I
quite
see
a
an
bit.
instant red flag there. I do civil rights law, so I'm just thinking, did I not get a waiver because of my protected class? Did this
Right.
person get a waiver? I think that can get really tricky.
I have to say, you're the only department that I work with that doesn't ask for flexibility. This is such an interesting thing. It's consistent now across 2.5 years of service. Every time an issue comes up, your department wants black and white rules. And it's the only department that I work with that asks for that. It's very interesting.
They're also one of the departments that interfaces most directly with the public. Right.
Police do, fire do, everyone
fair
does.
enough.
The bus drivers do. I guess, I don't know. It's interesting. Not judgment here.
How many of these cases do you have a month or a year? About how many and what percentage of those do the folks come back and claim their animal?
I have to give the statistics for you, but I know currently right now I think there's about 7 or 8 that are in there. The longest one, most recently, was 307 days.
So you're talking about like dozens a year, probably?
For cruelties, no more than a dozen. I'll say
No more than a dozen.
Maybe 5 to 8, but this year just seemed a little more.
And
Some of these cases can have multiple animals.
That's
So,
true.
which can be very onerous on animal care and control, especially when the owner is dragging out the case
Yeah.
intentionally.
And then how many of those folks eventually reclaim their animal? What percent would you say? A quarter, half, less?
I would say less, but I'd have to check on that because most of them. I mean, you can only claim your animal if you win your case.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Gates?
Thank you. You know, in some other contexts, I know we're talking about protected custody and bond and those costs. In the other context, with NOVs issued by animal control, there was provision for the chief animal control officer to forward or rescind the NOV, and it includes, I guess it's got 4 different, situations where that can be invoked. But the last one, C4's other good cause, which may constitute defense or reasonably serves the purpose of the title. So is there some reason we can't have similar other good cause provision for protected custody bond? I guess, and I'm looking at section 1705 C4.
Well, we kind of amended the state. I mean, we can put whatever you want to put in there, but I will say this, that, as far as discretion, you do have discretion when it comes to things such as civil disobedience, if you will. When it comes to the barking or the loose animal, or they're going to issue a notice of violation, they can make a judgment call at that time. In fact, if it comes to noise, they must first, instead, you must give them a warning first, and then you can issue them a citation. And you must tell them what their remedies are, what they might try to do to mitigate it so it doesn't reoccur. But in this case, I mean, we are talking about animal cruelty, and I just want to emphasize that. So I don't know what the discretion would be for.
Sure, that sounds inconsistent with the title. It's really horrible, I guess. I just wanted to point out some good causes.
I think there's a drafting error. I just want to point out.
Okay.
So it looks like under this section, it goes A, B, C, and then C, D, E. I think we have to change those to go D, E, F. And it'll add a little bit more clarity because right now we're talking, we go A, B, C into cruelty cases, and then we jump back into protected custody.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
let me just be clear on that.
Very good point.
Good point. Thank you, Ms. Zolotelo channeling Mr. Weddleton. Very well, very good. So let's push forward and see if we can get this. We've got 4 minutes left. Let's see if we can get through the last section.
Okay. On section 15, I noticed an error there as well where it says 17.25.100. That should actually say .010, which is the section on impound and animals subject to impound. We did notice that there was a missing reference. There's a section in the code that states any animals remaining on a premises subject to impound, and yet for some reason that reference was missing out of this paragraph, so we're just adding it in. Section 17, regulation of classified animals. This is a little bit of math real quick. The first time an animal, whether restrained or not, injures or kills a domestic animal under the code, depending on if it's unrestrained or unrestrained, then it's a level 2. If it's unrestrained animal, it's a level 4. And then you get into the section of level 4 where it says an animal, regardless of whether it's restrained for a second time, injures or kills a domestic animal, and that makes it a classification of a 4. Then you get into the level 5, which is euthanasia, and it says in there, it says an animal that was previously classified as a 3 or a 4, and then basically says if it repeats that behavior, it becomes a 5. Well, somebody made the argument, well, in order to repeat a behavior that says for a second time, I have to go 1, 2, 1, 2. And we're like, no, it's 3 strikes, you're out. It's the first time it's either a 2 or a 4. The second time it's definitely a level 4. And the third time it is a level 5.
Can I ask, if a dog got into a chicken coop and killed 3 chickens, first of all, are chickens domestic animals, and is that 3 strikes right there, or is that one incident?
We would count that as an incident.
Okay. And
It should be 3, not
Only if it left and came back.
Were the chickens fluffy?
They were left the door.
okay. All right. So we have one more section.
Okay, and animal control fees, this is just establishing for the new license. It's $150 annual, which is consistent with the commercial facility license which they currently get. And then in the fee table where it says redeemed animals, there has been some confusion because here's some examples. In the code, we'll talk about an impound fee shall be charged. Well, if you go to the table, you can't find the verbiage impound fees. It is redeemed, so they're just going to make it redeemed animals dash impound fees, make it easy for people to find it at the table.
Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up? So what's the...
Yeah, I wanted to talk process. So there are 4 of us in the room right now, which is not right. I would imagine that of all of this, there are 2 sections that my colleagues would like to debate. And so we'll rehash the dealing with the long-term confinements and then dealing with the bond and the issue there. So perhaps maybe instead of having a full hour work session on Friday, we'll just...
yeah. Do we have a work session?
We do have one scheduled, yeah. So maybe we could just do a short 30-minute on the topics that we think would be most...
And is this
to comment on.
Is this a public hearing on 23rd?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And I don't think there's any suggestion that we do a recommendation resolution from this committee.
Yeah, but it's
not necessary.
So
okay.
Could health department be there? I'll make it shorter. Instead of an hour, just 30 minutes on Friday.
Michael's going to be on leave that day, just FYI.
Okay. We have time for audience participation. Would anyone like to comment? Comments?
No, I'm here as another member of the Advisory Board. In case you had any question that he was unable to answer.
Okay, all right. Seeing no further comments, we're adjourned.